What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some highlights from the Steam Spring Sale for 2025, which is something I like to do for all of the major Steam sales, really, as I, quite frankly, as a PC channel, use Steam frequently, and I buy plenty of games there for myself, at the very least. Now, before we dive fully into that, a few things to get out of the way here at the beginning, though. I am a one-man operation, and I am in the US, so I deal in US dollars, so unfortunately I'm not really able to collate and gather up every single currency and regional pricing for people. That's just a little beyond my ability to collate efficiently, so all of this is in US dollars as a result of that. Furthermore, if you're unfamiliar with the channel, what I like to do for these highlight videos is focus on sales that are relevant to upcoming games. So for instance, if an upcoming sequel had prior releases, and those are on sale, that's of interest to me. And also any great games I had previously enjoyed, say within the last year or so, that are suddenly on sale for maybe the first time or just for a significant discount for once, that's worth a mention. Now, I say that because ultimately there are more deals that are part of these sales than I have it in me to cover, as there are quite literally thousands of them. So to that end, if there's a great sale on a particular game you want to shout out in the comments below, absolutely do so to let people know about it. Otherwise, you can check out all of these up until March 20th when the sale ends. But with no further ado, let's jump into this thing. Kicking it off with Solasta, Crown of the Magister, or the first Solasta game and all of its DLC via the, I think it's called the Lightbringer edition, which you can pick up at 45% off for $32. Now, Solasta 2 is an upcoming release that I would say people are fairly excited for, but it obviously got its start with the original Solasta, which is itself a more rules-as-written approach to 5th edition D&D, which means it's a pretty tactics-heavy game, though I will say if you decide to pick this one up, the main campaign is okay, but it's really not the game's best showing, but rather the DLC campaigns, alongside with campaigns you can run through the game's Dungeon Maker, are really where some of the best content is. Next up, we've got The Outer Worlds. So The Outer Worlds 2 is set to release later in 2025, and if you'd like to check out the first one, you can get all of it for 50% off, and collectively, if you want to buy everything the game has to offer, that puts the entire package at around $30. But if you say have the base game and only want to grab the DLCs, those are also 50% off, and various things like that. Now, personally, I really enjoyed The Outer Worlds. It had a great sense of humor. I enjoyed building things around, like say the science weapons. But if anything, I thought the game was a little short for my liking, maybe a little too hedged in, and it's my hope that The Outer Worlds 2 will simply aim to be bigger and better, but we shall ultimately see. Which brings us to my third entry, and this is kind of collectively Avernum 1, 2, and 3. These are sort of old school CRPGs that are remakes of older CRPGs, as it were. But the reason I'm mentioning these in particular is that Avernum 4 is set to receive a remake later this year as well. That was kickstarted last year, I believe, and has been in the works for a while, and as a channel that covers a lot of CRPGs that's relevant to me. And as a matter of fact, this is some of what I spent my own money here on in this sale, so I can get up to date with these myself before the fourth one drops, hopefully. But at 70% off for pretty much each of them puts all of them collectively at about $17. And considering I got 70 hours out of the first one alone, it doesn't seem like too bad of a deal. Speaking of CRPGs though, we then have Rogue Trader and its Season Pass. So, Rogue Trader being the Warhammer CRPG that puts us in the role of a Rogue Trader, just so happens to be receiving a 45% discount, which puts the base game at about $44 or $45, but you can also buy the Season Pass for that same discount, which puts it at $16. And I mention that specifically because the game's first of two planned DLCs, Void Shadows, was really good. It added a ton of depth to the game, and it is my hope that the second DLC, Lex Imperialis, will do the same. So if you own the base game but not the two DLCs, you can pay $16 for both of them, play Void Shadows right now and then Lex Imperialis when it releases later, or you could buy it all for a much cheaper price than you would normally get it for. Either way, though, as far as I'm concerned, money well spent these days, as it's a pretty good time. Now, speaking of the Warhammer franchise, though, Space Marine 2 is 35% off, putting it at $39 for the base game, and then about $58.50 for sort of all the bells and whistles with the season pass and everything. Now, I really enjoyed Space Marine 2, but the reason it's actually on this list is because if you happen to have missed it, very recently it was announced that Space Marine 3 is going to be in the works. Or is in the works, I should say, as it has officially received that green light, which is great for me. I'm excited to see what more they can do with Space Marine here. as it was just so much fun slaughtering my way through hordes and hordes of Tyranids among other enemies. Keeping it moving, though, with the upcoming release of Doom the Dark Ages, you may just be interested in the prior two sort of modern Doom titles, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, and these both got significant discounts. In fact, Doom 2016 is 90% off, putting it at a whopping $2, whereas Doom Eternal is 75% off, bringing the base game down to $9.99, and then the version of the game with like the DLC and stuff being like $17.50. So if you'd like to check those out before the Dark Ages drops, seems like a pretty good cost-effective time to do so. Next up, we've got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is 30% off, bringing it down to roughly $49, which is a pretty good price for that title, and it's a game I enjoyed a lot, especially having played the original Final Fantasy VII and seeing how they took that particular game and not only remade it, but also sort of added and changed some stuff along the way was a really interesting experience, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. Now, it's not a game I would recommend people try to 100% because it is massive, and that is quite the time investment, which sees you having to master all sorts of different things, such as the game's various mini-games. But either way, pretty good price for a pretty good game, which is a pretty similar situation for Ghost of Tsushima, which is 30% off, bringing it down to $40. And while there's plenty of great things to be said about this title, what stood out to me most, honestly, was the just story of it. I think the ending in particular hits especially hard, and it was just this wonderfully told narrative across a game that was fun to engage with, if even, sticking to like some tried and true approaches, with at least an attempt to mask some of them through various mechanics. Now, that said, probably worth a mention that this game does require a PSN account if you want to do like the multiplayer stuff, so something to watch out for if that's something you are trying to avoid for one reason or another. Then we have Octopath Traveler 2, a game I really loved from back in 2023, is actually 50% off, bringing it down to $30, and I had a blast with Octopath Traveler 2. It's really just a fantastically done JRPG, which is why it is actually on the sort of ranking list I like to do second only to BG3 that year. Really a tremendous title. So I wanted to shout out that you could get it for pretty cheap. Now, to start wrapping this list up, I wanted to talk about a few titles from last year that are on pretty good discounts. My favorite indie from last year, Another Crab's Treasure, is 40% off, bringing it down to $18. Everybody's favorite Shoals-like, it puts you in the role of a hermit crab trying to get his shell back, and it is a mix of fantastically funny humor and some really well-done Souls-like stuff, with a story that is surprisingly moving if you let it be. And for all of those reasons and more, I loved that game. I think you should definitely check it out, and for $18, it's a pretty cost-effective way to do that. And then we've got Metaphor Refantazio, one of the better games that released from last year, coming in at a 25% discount, bringing it down to $52. And while I do think the game drags a little bit in sort of the back middle portion, it's still overall fantastic time, and I think a discount that brings it under $60 especially makes it a much more accessible title. And while 25% isn't the greatest discount in that regard, it is a great game, and if you're looking for a little bit of a better price here to, sort of check it out and play it for yourself, I'd definitely consider doing so. Which brings me last but not least to a title that really surprised me last year, and that was actually Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, because when I picked that game up, I was expecting, a pretty good time. Didn't think it would be bad or anything, and yet, in spite of that, that game really managed to exceed my expectations. I really did have a blast with it, and I think if you give it a chance, it might just surprise you as well, which is obviously why I wanted to end on that title. But that does in fact bring us to the end of this particular video, which I certainly hope you enjoyed. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Feel free to stick around, as I do in fact do these for all the major Steam sales. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.